So the 2025 federal election is now, 2 and a bit weeks ago? And you think it would have wrapped up by now, but it seems that even now, this thing has been dragged out and it has one final surprise for all of us. It seems that today, the Liberal Party of Australia, despite thinking that it had already lost all hope and been reduced to ashes, actually somehow today managed to lose a tiny little bit of hope that it had left that it didn't even know about. Now, according to most organisations and pundits, there are 2 seats that cannot be called as of yet. Of the 150, there are just 2 left. One of them is Calwell in Victoria, which I'm not going to get into. That is going to be one of the most complex preference counts ever and could take another week to be called. The other seat is the traditionally Liberal heartland seat of Bradfield. Now, Bradfield, I'll be honest, is kind of boring, at least in terms of political contests. You don't really go up there and see tight elections. It is the strongest of Liberal strongholds, or at least it was. Billy Hughes held the seat for a time before he died. Brendan Nelson was from there. We're talking about the heartland of Liberal voters. It is very normal for, at least traditionally, for the vote there, two-party preferred, to be upwards of 60 to 65% in favour of the Liberal Party. During that Teal surge in support, all of Bradfield's coastal neighbours fell to Teal independence. North Sydney, Warringah, Mackellar all went that way, and Bradfield took a massive hit for the Liberals. I believe they suffered a 15-point swing against them on the primary vote, and they eventually won against the Teal independent, but only by a margin of 54 to 46, which by Liberal standards in Bradfield is absolutely horrific. The previous record for low support in the two-party preferred numbers, I believe, was back in the 50s, and they still won, the Libs that is, 58% on the final count. So despite the fact that the Liberal Party had its first major collapse in 2022 before their collapse this year, Paul Fletcher managed to hang on in Bradfield. And look, 4% is nothing to hold your nose at, but it certainly wasn't ideal considering that previously they were winning upwards of 65% of the two-party preferred vote there. So Paul had to be careful and make sure that everything went his way. Then, redistribution happened. So in late 2024, the Australian Electoral Commission was redrawing the electoral boundaries of a lot of seats in New South Wales. And Sydney's North Shore in particular really got shaken up during that redistricting process. The main reason for that shake-up being that the electoral division of North Sydney that had existed since Federation was abolished, and it had to be absorbed into the neighbouring seats to ensure the proper proportion of seats to population. And that really had an effect, particularly on Warringah, Bennelong, and Bradfield. Now, it's important to remember that in 2022, North Sydney was won by a Teal independent. Kylie Tink, and yes, that is how you pronounce that, beat Trent Zimmerman to take the seat away from the Liberal Party. So this was an electorate that was used to the idea of voting for a more progressive independent than just voting for the Liberal candidate. Now, when this seat got carved up, a big chunk of it went to Warringah, benefiting Zali Steggall. A chunk of it went to Bennelong, which didn't really have too much of an effect. I mean, that is a Liberal versus Labor seat, and I think it made it notionally a Liberal seat by 0.1%, so not a massive impact there. But where it did have an impact was on Bradfield. Now, you might think that North Sydney getting abolished was a net negative for the Teal movement. They lost one of their MPs in Parliament and a seat that they could have reliably won for years to come. But there is a saying that when God closes a door, he opens a window. And that many Teal voters being incorporated into Bradfield was the perfect opportunity for the Teal movement to pick up another seat. Before the redistribution, Bradfield looked like this. And then afterwards, it looked like this. And that incorporated a massive chunk of what was North Sydney and spelt massive, massive trouble for the Liberal Party. And maybe it's not a coincidence that Paul Fletcher decided to retire at this election, because things did not look good for him. It went from a margin of 4.5% to these new boundaries having a notional Liberal margin of only 2.5%. So things are not looking good for the crown jewel of what used to be the Liberal Party's Northern Sydney heartland. What we have now is an incredibly painful redistribution, that reduces the margin to 2.5%, the incumbent retiring, and, well, we all know how the Liberal campaign went. And at the start of the night, it did seem that the Teal Independent in Bradfield was doing very well for herself and appeared to be on track for victory. But as the night went on, the Liberal Party really did come back and their candidate slowly inched back in front. And then it seemed, or at least most people agreed, that it was going to be called for the Liberals at some point. That is until today. Over the last couple of days, as the final postal votes have been coming in, the Liberal lead there has been getting narrower and narrower and narrower and narrower. And then today it was confirmed that the Liberal Party was officially behind for the first time since election night, and that the Teal Independent was ahead by 19 votes. And so today we got the final batch of postal votes, and they were counted. And in an electorate where upwards of 100,000 people voted, the Teal Independent on this provisional count won by 39 votes. So Nicolette Buller is now provisionally the winner of Bradfield. And normally it doesn't matter, the provisional winner is always going to be the winner in the end because it's so clear who is in the lead. But with an instance like this where it is so close, the AEC is going to have to do a full preference division and count and then declare a winner. And honestly, that is going to go to a recount immediately. The AEC has to do recounts if the final result is a lead of less than 100 votes. So it is not over yet. But I think it is fair to say now, and the ABC has said it themselves, is that Buller is now, at this moment, more likely than not going to be the one of the two candidates that ends up going to Canberra when the result is finally declared. And that has some implications because it seems that the Liberal Party got a little bit ahead of itself in thinking that they were going to win Bradfield. So the Liberal candidate in Bradfield was so confident that she had won that she went to the leadership race between Susan Lee and Angus Taylor and actually voted. As we understand it, she's a moderate. She definitely voted for Susan Lee, but she wasn't even a member of Parliament. And I think we understand how concerningly narrow that election was between Angus Taylor and Susan Lee. We know for a fact that at least 2, potentially 3, people that voted for Susan Lee in that leadership contest were outgoing senators who will not be in the party room after July 1st, which means that effectively the leadership race was a tie between Lay and Taylor if you take away the extra votes she got from outgoing senators. And we also know now that one of the people that voted for Susan Lay might not even be in Parliament in a week when the final counting in Bradfield is accomplished. And we know on top of that, that the member for Longman, who is now, LNP member, who has now won, didn't take part in that leadership vote because he didn't know if he had been elected yet. And he's a member of the National Right, so he definitely would have voted for Angus Taylor. If you repeat the Liberal leadership election on July 2nd, then those senators that supported Susan will be gone. The person that thought they were in Parliament but hasn't even been elected and probably won't get elected wouldn't be there. And Taylor would have one more supporter behind him. Looking at the numbers there, Taylor wins that vote. And something tells me that the National Right, the hard right faction of the Liberal Party, is well aware of that fact. Part of me can't help but feel a little bit bad for the Liberals in this situation, despite my obvious bias. I mean, look, they won back Goldstein from the Teal Independent. They almost got Kooyong back. There were signs that they were actually going to make ground against the Teal movement in some certain circumstances. But then just as they thought that they were pulling something off, they lose another part of the Liberal heartland to this movement. It's honestly just incredible to look at.